Welcome to today's topic. Today's topic is about Adam and Eve, Adam and Steve, women's right from the biological differences, from the religious perspectives, and I'm a public health researcher and scientist, so you're gonna have all perspectives all in one under 5 minutes. Stay tuned. To start with the biblical verse, Genesis 3:16, your desire will be for your husband, and he will rule over you. So at the beginning, God already knows that women have a strong sense of desire. You're probably already familiar with the Adam and Eve story, and we're not equal because God first created Adam and he saw him lonely and he needs for the emotions and the help and the support. So he created Eve from his ribs. And for a scientist, from our perspective, from the human perspective, the way we can understand it, it's like a bone marrow transplant. When you take one cell and you make a human, but God's power is different. God's power is drastically different, and He made Eve by saying be, and it becomes. So not from our perspective, from our scientific perspective, from a human perspective, it's possible even with the human, but God's power is different. God, when he said, let it be, and it becomes. So he created us from the mud. He created Adam and Eve. So Adam also had the sense of desire. It's not like we're eliminated from the sense of desire. We both are sinful, and that's what Jesus says when he came in. He said, both. You're looking at it from the sinful perspective, then man's and women's, everybody is sinful. So when it comes to the sense of desire, that was how it originated. So when we talk about it, we're talking about it from how it originated. So that's why in Judaism, to start with, they said, women are sinful because the Adam and Eve story. They noticed that women have a strong sense of desire. Also, as you remember from my last video, we talked about evolutions and the contamination from evolutions to Adam and Eve, or Adam and Eve to evolutions, and we are complete segregated and we're complete different from evolution. So they have noticed that, and that's why they said, through Judaism, they said, women are sinful. And when Jesus came in, he said, if you're talking about sin from that perspective, then everybody is sinful. So we're not equal from the sense of creation, and we're not equal from the sense of desire. And I hope now you understand that all three religions do agree on the first verse of Genesis, that your desire will be for your husband and he will rule over you. Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, we all agree on that. So we're not equal. Adam and Eve, they're not equal at the creation. They're not equal from the sense of desire, even though all three religions do agree on the desire of the women's and the role over the women's. That does not give the power. That only meant for the completions of both souls to be one. And that also, if you're going to look at it from a religious perspective, then you got to act in a good faith. You can't say, okay, from a religious perspective, and now I have abusive power, or power over women, or neglect women. So that's when women's right comes in. Now, you might jump on me with the Islamic verse saying that women are less intelligent, and well, actually, the real translation is less brain and less religion. But you have to remember that Islam is a religion. So when they meant it as a less religious, it means they're not acting in a good faith. That's for one. The second, less intelligence, what they mean is by the hormonal difference. Imagine they talked about it 1500 years ago. They talked about hormonal differences. Nobody would understand it at the time. But afterward, now we understand from scientific perspectives. In the 1800, the hormonal studies found it, and they created where we understand the biological differences between female and male, and they understood the hormonal differences, mood differentiations, if you want to talk about it from a psychological perspective. So, from biological differences from the anatomy and the physiology, we understand that males and females are different. Just like how God created us, we're not equal, we're completely different. It's like two different species. So Adam and Steve, what we mean by it is the LGBT community, QIA plus. They're trying to change the evolutions. They're trying to change the DNA. They're trying to change the hormonal status, the mental status. Well, if you change all of that, then yeah, we are. They are this group of people. They are gonna be the same or the middle between the Adam and Eve. So that's why we have Steve. As a public health researcher, I do support the LGBT community. From the social perspective, I do support them. From the scientific perspective, I do support them. From the empowerments to the vulnerable groups. However, I do not support LGBT communities from the radical. There is a radical groups within every communities, whether LGBT, whether Islamic, whether Christian, whether it's there's radical groups within a group within communities all the time. So I do not support any radicals, but I do support them as a public health researcher. I do support them from the probably the abusive or differences or defective mentals. All of those I do consider them as a could be a part of disability, or could be a part of uniqueness, or could be a part of vulnerable groups. So those are two different subjects. Being a radical or being supportive as a public health researcher. Women's right, of course, I do support women's right as a public health researcher and scientist. I do support women's right. Sometimes I do question it though, because women did not just appear out of nowhere and we have to give them the rights, and we looked at them as a vulnerable groups. They actually, women existed when Adam and Eve exist. So it's not like just a species that just appeared out of nowhere and we have to give them right. However, I do support it, women's right, do for not have the power of one gender over the other. I do support women's right. I do believe that women's have more intelligence than men, and men have more intelligence than women's, and there's a cross between them. So it doesn't have to do anything with intelligence. I do support women's. If we look at it back from the Gather and Hunter, at some point in time, women used to be worshipped because they do all the work. They collect all the fruits, and they had to look at them whether they're poisonous or not. So they started to have the intelligence of the skills and the intelligence of differentiating between colors. That's why women still nowadays they're so creative, and they're more detail oriented because they have adapted these skills way back from hunting gatherers, where they used to look at the fruits. They also give the labors and they give the blessings to the humanity. I'm all about women's right and closing the gaps. But women's did not just appear out of nowhere, like I mentioned. Women's did have some kind of powers over the period of times when the Egyptians were there. They did have powers when the philosopher came out. There's different time periods where they did have the powers. So woman right comes in as a publicly, women's right comes in as lawfully. Women's right, I do support women's right lawfully. I do support women's right publicly. But when it comes to religions, I do support women's right as, act in a good faith. I do support women's right when it comes, not when it comes to economically, but that could be. So I do support women's right publicly. I do support women's right lawfully. I do support the respect between the two genders. I do support the closing the gaps from the perspective of respect. I do not support the woman's right to comes as an abusive when it comes to a relationship as marriage. I do not support women's right when it comes to overcome the religion. So I do not support women's when they wanted to change the ideology of faith. I do not support when it comes to women's when they wanted to change um, the theology and the ideology of faith, of the monofaith, whether religion, whether Christianity, Judaism, or Islam. So to conclude this topic, Adam and Eve, they're not equal biologically, we're not equal physiology. We are created to complete each other from the religious perspective, and that's how it's supposed to be. From the public perspective, I think everybody should be, we should close the gaps, we should respect each other. There is people, like I said, with LGBTQII plus, some people are born disabled. Some people are they had the disadvantage. I do not support any radical groups within any of the groups, whether women's right or Adam and Eve or LGBT. I do not support any radical groups. However, if we look at the when Genesis, when the Genesis began, women's they had this strong sense of desire more than male, more than male. So there is that is one of the biggest difference that it created as a socially. If we look at Adam and Eve, if we look at Eve from the start, they were so detail oriented because a hunt and gather. They had to look at the poisonous food and differentiate from the good food, and then they also do not only do the labor, but they give birth through the labor. And that was they started worshiping women at that time. So women didn't only just appear to have a woman's right; they were worshipped at some point in time, and then they had so much rights, and then it goes down and it goes up. That is from the woman's right perspective. Adam and Eve closing gaps, a change in DNA and biological differences to make that gaps as a physical difference between Adam and Eve. That is all for today. Hope you enjoyed this topic. I'll see you next one.